Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
In October of 2021, I encountered what I believe to be an extraterrestrial inside my house, followed soon after by 3 other extraterrestrials in my house. It was a normal Friday evening at first. My dad, I was in college in Montana, living with him at the time, had gone to sleep at about 10 p.m., and I stayed up until about 11:30. At 11:30 I turned off my TV and went to lay on my bed, where I promptly pulled out my phone and began browsing. This lasted for about 45 minutes before I finally decided to go to sleep. I realized that my throat felt a little dry, so I got up to get some water from the fridge. My room used to be a second living room off the kitchen, so there's no door on the frame, only a thick curtain. As I approached the curtain, everything was normal. It was just a normal night. The only thing that seemed a little off was how quiet it was. There were no crickets chirping outside, which there always were. I live in a secluded country ranch house, which was unusual. I could still hear my dad's white noise maker in his bedroom, though. He uses it to help him sleep. It felt like a normal late night. I pulled the curtain aside to step out into the kitchen and experienced the single most terrifying thing in my entire life. Behind the curtain was what I believed to be an extraterrestrial/alien. It was facing the hallway to my dad's room, and it was in a crouched position. We had a nightlight plugged in right above the kitchen countertop, so I assume it was trying to avoid that light. Its skin color was a sort of dark gray/gunmetal color. As I pulled the curtain all the way back, the alien turned its head sharply to look at me. I gasped and was immediately overcome by an immense sense of dread and terror. I was quite literally paralyzed by fear. I just stood there with my hand on the curtain, mouth agape. It stared at me for a couple of seconds, and then everything went black. I regained consciousness an hour later and was laying on top of my bed, the covers still made. My heart was pounding, and it felt like it was beating 1,000,000 times a minute. I saw something on my left, which was the darkest part of my room, and had a door leading to our carport. Standing over my bed were 3 dark gray figures. They were tall, their heads nearly touching the 7-foot ceilings in my room. I turned my head, stared at them, and began to experience the same sense of terror as before. It was the exact same sense of dread and paralysis. I was unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except look. This time they looked at me for much longer than a couple of seconds. It felt like it lasted a full minute or more. At the end of that minute, the being in the middle leaned in a little bit and moved its hand toward my foot. It tapped its finger on my foot 3 times, slowly. Each time it tapped, a strange sensation pulsed through my body. It was just a weird energy that I can't really describe. After the 3rd pulse subsided, the being stood straight again, and then everything went black again. I regained consciousness yet again a minute or 2 later, still on top of my bed, covers still made, and immediately began to cry. I don't mean just a tear or 2, I mean that I was quite literally just bawling my eyes out for the next few minutes. Eventually, all that emotion subsided and I grabbed my phone from my bedside table. It was 1:33 a.m. I didn't end up going to sleep at all that night. I just sort of sat there on my bed trying to explain to myself what just happened. In the year since this has happened, I've yet to come up with an explanation that doesn't involve aliens, demons, ghosts, or some sort of paranormal phenomenon. I thought of sleep paralysis at first, but I never went to sleep before I saw the first one. I was wide awake still when I went to get a drink of water. I wasn't dreaming, because I hadn't yet gone to sleep. When the 3 came right after, I thought that it could be sleep paralysis since I woke up on my bed, and was unable to move or even scream when they looked at me. But how did I get in bed when the last thing I remember was looking at the first one in my kitchen? I know you hallucinate when experiencing sleep paralysis, but how did I see 3 distinct beings that essentially remained motionless, and what was that sensation whenever it tapped my foot? If it was sleep paralysis, I've never had it before, and I haven't had it since. If it was some sort of spontaneous mental breakdown, I've never had one before and haven't had one since. If it was just some bad nightmare, When did I go from getting off my phone and getting a drink of water to sleeping and having a nightmare? Every time I think about it, I get an uneasy feeling, just thinking about the dread I felt that night. It makes me feel squirmy and nervous. That night felt like death, but I don't know if whatever was in my house, or whatever I imagined, was malevolent. I don't know if they hurt me or did anything to me or my dad. I don't know if I was crazy, sleep deprived, or actually encountered aliens in my house. I've seen and felt some strange things before and after, including in lost time, seeing what I believe to be UFOs, and animals on the ranch we live on being mutilated. The lost time thing was a little freaky. I was texting my brother about video games in the middle of the morning. I was in the middle of a response, laying on the bed in my room, when all of a sudden I was sitting on the couch in the first living room, opposite the kitchen to my bedroom. 7 whole hours had passed, and I didn't remember any of it. There were 2 texts from my brother, about an hour apart, the first of which was him asking if I got his text. Then the second was just a couple of question marks. I was confused and didn't really know what to do. The UFOs thing is self-explanatory. I've seen lights fly over my house at night. There is an airport about an hour away and I see planes on occasion, but these lights are always either too fast to be a plane, too slow to be a plane, or too quiet to be a low-flying helicopter. The animal mutilation thing is the saddest part for me. I have about 10 outside cats or barn cats that I feed regularly and who keep away snakes, bugs, and whatnot. Most of them are spayed/neutered and vaccinated, but new ones show up still and get pregnant somehow. Every so often one of them gets killed, be it by a mountain lion, stray dog, coyote, or other cat. It's gruesome, but it happens. But there have been a couple in the past few months that have made no sense, and all have been the same way. A single cut down the middle of their bodies. The cut goes all the way through their sternum and everything. It's always perfectly straight, and none of their internal organs or anything is damaged. It's like someone took a razor or something and slit them. We've found them on our driveway and the private road leading to our driveway. There's never any blood, and the cat is just dead on the ground, already in rigor mortis. It makes no sense, and it makes me sad because I've raised most of those cats from kittens.
What are the reasons for alien visits? I had an encounter when I was 16 years old in 1998. We were living in Washington State, near Bangor Naval Base. 24 years later, I still remember this as clearly as the day it happened. It's late at night. No clue what time. Everyone else is asleep and I'm laying in bed tossing and turning. At some point, I rolled over onto my shoulder, which is a position I usually sleep in, and am now facing my room's entrance door. It is at this point that I realize that standing in the doorway is a short gray being. I was instantly paralyzed with fear, and I couldn't do anything but lay there. For a second I was able to muster enough courage to hide under the blanket. But unfortunately it was one that my grandmother hand knit me, the kind of blanket that isn't tightly wound together and has a lot of little holes in it. This meant that I was not only staring at this thing still. The next thing I remember is that I am all of a sudden out from under the blanket and staring at the ceiling. Like I blinked my eyes and was suddenly in this new position. No more being. Never saw it again. I have always wondered what it was doing and why it was there, just looking at me. I have asked myself that, and others have believed that to be true when I tell them the story. I can't accept that though, this is why. It happened over 20 years ago, and I remember everything from it. I can recall everything in my head, like it's a movie I have seen 1,000 times. I'm not just talking about the physical events, but the emotions and even more so the sensory experiences. That being stated, I have ADHD. It is a struggle for me to remain present and grounded, and it's an even bigger struggle to remember minutiae details. I have never had any dream with such clarity. I have 2 children. While I can tell you that I was filled with joy when I first held them, I am not able to describe the things I did or said or the things I heard or how they looked when they first entered the world. 2 entirely different situations, but I think you get the point. Now, with this other event. Again, over 20 years ago. I know exactly, and I mean exactly, how I felt at that moment. I was terrified. I can still feel how my body reacted to that fear, the cold feeling I got, the goosebumps, and how shaky my breathing was. I remember the sensations from pulling the blanket over my head trying to hide, how that blanket felt resting on my face, and the embarrassment when I realized that it could still see me. I remember vividly exactly what the thing looked like. from all of its facial features, its height, color, etc. I am not saying that it isn't possible that this is a nightmare. What I am saying is that this memory is the only one I have ever been able to reconstruct. Each and every sensory input I had in that moment, I can recall. It will, on demand. There isn't another memory I have that even comes close to that.
This incident happened in October 1988, and I am beginning to recall what happens in recent years. I once thought that it was a vivid dream, but now I believe that this was an actual event. My father and I were deer hunting with bow and arrow near Schultzburg, Wisconsin in Lafayette County. I was 15 years old at the time of this event. A deer walked under my tree stand and I took a shot. I waited for my father to return to my tree stand as he was about a mile away in his own tree stand. This was well after dark. I told him that I took a shot and we proceeded to follow the blood trail together. As we were walking through the field following the trail, I observed a violet light hovering over the tree line going from left to right. I told my father and he didn't pay much attention because he was following the blood trail and told me to quit messing around. I shined my flashlight at the light and it darted off toward the woods very fast. After some time the trail stopped and my father said we would resume searching in the morning, but he thought I probably had a brisket shot too low and wasn't going to get the deer. That night we ate dinner cooked by the Coleman stove and got ready for bed in the back of his old 1973 Chevy pickup. It had a metal cab on the back and I remember windows on the side and in the back. My dad snores loud and I remember him snoring that night. As I was laying in the back of the truck, at some point of the night or early morning, I remember having a frightening feeling that someone was watching me, to the point I didn't want to open my eyes. I did, and through the side window saw what I think was the big-eyed, large-head gray looking back at me. I closed my eyes again and heard what was like a mechanical voice telling me,
"We are not going to hurt you."
Then something made me open the back window of the truck cab and get out. When I did, I observed 3 short and 2 taller, large-headed, big-eyed gray aliens, and that a disc-shaped craft landed in the field about 200 feet from the truck. I remember the little ones touching my fingers and leading me toward the craft and saying, "Do not be scared," in a mechanical voice that seemed to be in my head. That is all I remember. I woke up in the back of the truck thinking that this was a vivid, scary dream, and it has bothered me since it happened. To this day, when I see an image on TV or in print of an alien gray, it sends chills down my spine.
My wife and I were on a short vacation in Cape May, New Jersey this past weekend. We were staying at a B&B on Beach Avenue, with a view of the sea. I was asleep when I was awakened by something. I opened my eyes and saw 2 beings standing at the foot of the bed. It was dark, but there was adequate light coming in from the street for me to see them very clearly. I estimate that they were between 4.5 to 5 feet tall because I could only see them from the waist up. They were identical in every way. They were wearing black or dark green, form-fitting outfits that resembled scuba diving dry suits. These included snug hoods that extended from the back of their necks over top of their skulls. On their upper chests was a rectangular, gold or bronze-colored plate about 6 by 4 inches with 2 rows of inscribed symbols or buttons on them. It resembled an instrument touchpad of some sort. They were no more than 6 feet from my face and they were both staring right at me. It was a cool, appraising look. It's the look a cat might give you. Their crania were very large, perhaps twice as large as a man's. But it was their faces that really got me. They had huge, wraparound, black eyes set above high cheekbones. Their skin appeared coppery or orange in color. I couldn't detect a well-defined mouth or nose, but along the rim of their jaws and down to their chins were some kind of organ-like structures. Gills? Mandibles? Not sure. I couldn't see their hands, so I can't say how many digits they had. As I say, I had a very clear view of them. When I realized that this was not a dream, I propped myself up on my elbows to get a better view. Strange, but I felt no fear. I was about to say something, when I got this very clear thought: something is wrong. He sees us. I suddenly became extremely sleepy. I tried to fight the urge to lie back down, but it was no use. I felt my eyes closing and that was it. The next thing I knew, it was morning and I was awakened by the sunlight streaming in through the balcony door. Once she was awake, I asked my wife how she had slept and she said it was the best night's sleep she'd had in a while. No dreams. This isn't the first time in my life that I've had what could be called nocturnal visitations. As a child and teenager, they were very frequent and often terrifying. As an adult, they tapered off to the point where I chalked up my youthful experiences to dreams, hormones, flights of fancy, etc. I had even stopped thinking about them. But this is the first time as an adult that I had such a clear and unambiguous sighting of these creatures. If one thing stands out, it's the sense of almost military precision and discipline that I got from them. It's hard to explain, but I got the feeling that these were no-nonsense men who had a job to do and followed orders to the letter. They were not there to be my friend or to tell me any of the universe's secrets. They were under orders and would no sooner go against them than would one of our Navy SEALs. And one last thing, they were supremely confident and felt not the slightest fear towards me. I am absolutely sure of that.
We were having a family, friends get-together to celebrate a birthday. During the celebration, 2 of my nephews and a niece came tearing into the house, screaming at the top of their lungs, saying that a plane crashed in one of the adjacent pastures. My brother, myself, and about 3 others walked outside to see what was causing all the ruckus. We didn't see anything out of the ordinary except a strange burning smell that smelled like burning mesquite. We didn't think anything of it since it was kind of nippy and someone could have been burning some wood in their fireplaces. We told them to show us where they saw the plane go down, and we walked over to the place they showed us. The first thing we noticed was that all the dogs in the area were going bonkers. They were barking up a storm, like they were all seeing the same thing. The area we live in is pretty much a rural community, unless you live in the city of Monahans, Texas. Many of the houses are set on large plots of land, usually 4 or 5 acres per house. Although we can see the houses of many of our neighbors and we do have traffic on the road, you do get the feeling of being all to yourself out here. Some of the land by our house is overrun by wild mesquite trees. Only a small portion of the land surrounding the house is cultivated and cleared out. Beyond the stand of trees runs a small barbed wire fence that separates us from our neighbors, who I could see were home from the lights on in the house. We walked around the edge of the trees, not wanting to really go into the stand at night. Even though it's technically winter, there could be rattlesnakes seeking shelter in amongst the trees, not to mention that mesquite trees have some wicked thorns that protrude from them. They are razor sharp and quite capable of punching through a pair of jeans or boots, and they hurt like hell to get out. As we looked around, we started noticing a sort of electrical charge to the very air around us. Almost like the kind you feel when you approach a large electrical substation or a charged and active radio antenna. As we made our way around the trees, one of my brothers noticed some light peeking through the trees. I told him it was probably one of the neighbors leaving or coming home. He promptly told me that it couldn't be headlights because the light seemed too diffused and not as concentrated as a car's headlight. We moved around, and as we cleared the stand of trees, we were shocked to see an oval-shaped object hovering, maybe 4 or 5 feet off the ground. We stood there in total shock and awe. I can only imagine that our jaws were probably on the ground. As we stood there watching this object hover there without a sound, I took note that the object was maybe about 30 to 40 feet from front to back. It was maybe the same dimensions around. The object seemed to be of a highly polished material that reflected the area around it. The reflection of the distant streetlights from the surrounding neighbors' properties seemed to reflect off the surface of the object. There was also a small dull glow to the object, barely noticeable unless you were really looking, almost like an aura of sorts, an iridescent blue of sorts. As we stood there in total shock, my brother next to me expressing his disbelief, we saw 2 strange-looking men appear from around the object. They at first didn't notice us. They were busy running around and gathering objects from the ground, from the trees. They didn't seem to notice us at first. They looked to be about the size of my oldest nephew, about 4 feet tall, but they looked very skinny, like they had no meat on their bones. Their heads were large and their arms were long, skinny, and hung down around their knees. About this time, my 2 nephews came walking up behind us, scaring the hell out of us. They saw the object and the strange men, and in a voice that only a kid can project, screamed out loud, "What are those things?" That's when the creatures turned and noticed us. The sight of these creatures was something that will haunt me till the day I die. It turned and looked right at us. Its eyes were large, almost like the eyes of a praying mantis, except they were jet black and wrapped around its head. The 2 creatures looked at us for about 7 seconds, not an ounce of movement, before they calmly walked around the craft, one right after the other. They disappeared behind the craft and we never saw them again. A few seconds later, the craft lifts up, not a sound coming from the object, no rush of wind, not even a swaying of the nearby branches of a mesquite tree. It rose quietly and hovered about 40 feet from the ground and shot out like a bat out of hell. As it zoomed away, it started glowing and made it easier to track as it zoomed away, getting higher and higher till it faded away. We stood there in complete silence as we tried to make heads or tails of what the hell we just saw. My brother finally piped up and said, should we call the police? After which, I burst out in laughter and replied to him, and tell them what? My nephew looked like he had just seen the devil himself, which considering what we just saw, I don't blame him. He didn't want to talk about it, and after we made our way back to the house, he still didn't talk about it. I tried to ask him about it yesterday and he basically told me that he didn't want to think about it yet. He was still processing what had happened to him. I was more than happy to leave it at that. I never really believed in the subject of UFOs or aliens, but after the events of this night, I'm seriously going to reevaluate that belief. I know that I plan to keep my mind open and start looking up towards the sky a little bit more from now on.
One evening in the spring of 1975, my girlfriend and I were driving through the Kansas countryside. After crossing a cement bridge that spanned a river, we pulled into a farmer's access road and parked at the edge of a field alongside a bend in the river with the car pointing east. Not long after we stopped, we noticed a strange light that suddenly approached our location in a quick blur. Suddenly, hovering above the trees was a dark object, rectangular in shape with one red and one green running light positioned together on the lower part of the craft at its center. We stared in amazement and couldn't take our eyes off the object. After 5 minutes or so, we noticed the craft's position had moved to the right. It seemed to move in a very slow motion to the other side of the river. After another 5 minutes, I decided to drive away from the area. As we turned onto the county road and subsequently onto the cement bridge, we saw that the craft had returned to its original position, above us and slightly back from the bridge. I stopped again and got out to look at the craft. The object was about 20 to 25 feet wide, and now I noticed a large rectangular glass window, or what appeared to be glass, running across the middle third of its front. Standing inside to the left side looking down on us were two beings, which I could see only from the waist up, but could tell that these beings were about 4 feet tall, with abnormally large heads and large black eyes. The eyes seemed devoid of emotion and their skin was pure white, like the moon, the texture resembling that of an albino salamander. Their eyes ran almost north/south with their heads. The craft hovered silently the whole time. After about a minute of eye contact with the humanoids, I got back into the car and rapidly drove away from the area. We could still see the craft hovering where we had left it. My girlfriend and I eventually married and still live very near to the location where we witnessed this craft. Sometimes, we both get an urge to return to the spot and just sit there and talk about our shared experience, kind of hoping these beings would stop by.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.